I don't appreciate Donald Trump waiting to do these invasions until after midnight, until after we've shut the shutters on our program. Why can't he, like a considerate man, have his invasions between 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? Why couldn't he have done it in a time bracket that could have been beneficial to me? That's the first thing. Okay, like a normal American. But no, jokes aside, the reason it was done after midnight was for two reasons. The first reason it was done after midnight is because if you conduct a night raid with Chinook helicopters, which is what they ended up doing after a series of airstrikes across the country that hit everything from air defense systems to the electrical grid to Hugo Chavez's like mausoleum, so quite a variety of targets before Chinook helicopters come in. Having it at nighttime helps obfuscate the operation. It makes it harder to see the Chinook, makes it harder to see infantry kind of like shuffling around in the distance. And a Chinook helicopter can carry about 36 men. A Chinook can carry a lot of guys. And we could see like quite a few Chinooks in the air. So, I mean, they had quite a few special operators in the country to go do what we now know is a snatch and grab operation with Nicolas Maduro, where they black bagged him in the night. But doing it at nighttime obviously gave them more operational security. On the other hand, doing it at nighttime means that the majority of the American public is asleep. And so if anything goes wrong, or like in the initial stages of chaos when nobody knows what's really happening and then speculation is abound, the majority of America is asleep. They can wake up to this crisis largely having passed, at least in the minds of military operators. By the time everybody's woken up, they've gotten their flapjacks, they've gotten the coffee, and they've actually gotten their morning paper. Of course, I'm talking about this like it's 1990s America. I guess it would be once you roll out of bed and you're wiping your ass and you take your phone out and you see what's going to be the pop-up news that you get notified of. Either way, by doing it at nighttime, not only do you give like some operational security to the special ops that went in there and black bag Maduro, but you're also allowing America to basically sleep through the entirety of, you can call it a lightning war, you can call it a smash and grab, you can call it an invasion. I don't know what terminology people want me to lead with, but all of those words would be accurate. All of those descriptors would be accurate. So I'm just gonna land on whatever word I'm gonna use in the immediacy, but I just want to be clear. The term invasion is accurate. I see some people are saying, "Oh, this was a police operation," right? I'm waiting to hear somebody say this is a special. Nobody said special military operation yet, but the terminology got dangerously close while listening to so-called anti-interventionist senators who represent the presidency trying to find ways to describe exactly what's happening. And it's like they're not saying special military operation, but like special police operation. Like I don't, it's a lot of legalese. But let's be clear, an invasion, it is an invasion. Now, I can stand here and try to go through like legal terminology. What is an invasion under international standards and international law? What counts as an invasion and what counts as an attack? What counts as X, Y, and Z? But let me just use simple descriptive language. Simple descriptive language. An invasion is using one nation's forces to enter another nation to do anything. If you go in to do that without approval of the government, you are invading their territory without their permission. That is an invasion. It could be for good reasons, it could be for bad reasons. And I am looking at footage here which shows what we all know now is U.S. special operators. I mean, at the time, I could have told you this was the United States. And the reason I could have told you at the time that this was the United States, as long as it's not like AI footage, is those are Chinook helicopters. You can kind of tell they got like kind of elongated stomach between two propeller systems on the back and the front. You see like these big Chinook helicopters, very famous, very American. but they also don't have them in Venezuela. So unless there is another peer competitor around Venezuela that can flop out a bunch of Chinooks like this with this much air power, really the only culprit could have been the United States or some fantastic deepfake footage, which, by the way, I do want to say, I only saw one person repost ARMA footage this time. So I don't know if we're getting better at identifying ARMA footage or people are just getting better with deepfake that ARMA footage is no longer necessary. I don't know which one it is. I'd like to hope it's the former, but it's probably a combination of both. Either way, these are American special operators, special forces that were sent in to kidnap Nicolas Maduro and what the United States says is a police operation to arrest the man and bring him to justice in the United States. But this is an invasion because these are American forces entering the country that are only able to enter the country due to the use of American air power. We struck their air defense systems. We struck a mausoleum. We bombed the electrical grid that was outside of military bases under the idea of you want to knock out the power that supports the military base. But obviously that crosses over into civilian life as well, as many people in Caracas who had no idea that any war was coming. And the immediacy, of course, like people hear stuff in the news, but they, I don't know if there's going to be a war tonight. I certainly don't know for sure that a war is even happening in the first place. And all of a sudden they're waking up to explosions and power outages. But the air power was pretty devastating. Let me get some footage of that out, actually, because I was collecting it last night. I'm going to be honest, because I'm a night owl. I tend to be a night owl. And so while everybody else was sleeping through it, which was the intention by carrying out this operation at nighttime, the rest of America sleeping through it, me and a other set of night owls up on their Friday nights were, of course, just sweating through their pajamas. 1 second. But here you can see a lot more of the air power.
Mira, huevón, durísimo, chamo. Ya vas a ver un incendio, pero una vaina. Oye, marico, algo está pasando. Verga, marico. Ignacio, otra vaina en el aeropuerto, papá.
¿Qué hacemos? ¿Qué hacemos?
Aquí, acá.
See, if you want to call it a police operation, which under U.S. law, that's probably what the American administration is going to be running with in order to justify the idea that they just invaded a country and snatched up their president, illegitimate as he may be, since he, did steal an election and he stole it very openly. To say that isn't an invasion and to try to say, we don't need congressional approval, they're going to be going under the idea that this is a legal operation. This is a police operation. We're just arresting the man. And look, I don't really care much to negotiate whether or not this could be considered a legal police operation. I would just say for many Venezuelans, when somebody gets arrested, that means somebody gets handcuffed. That usually does not mean your power gets knocked out or your town or city gets bombed. And so classifying it as an invasion, again, I think is absolutely fine, considering there were U.S. forces invading the country after bombing was done in Caracas. I hate to belabor this point, but I've seen a lot of people playing legalese online, and I just want to clarify very clearly that this is an invasion before we talk about anything else, because this administration was campaigning heavily on the idea of no new wars. There's going to be no new wars. They called it the pro-peace ticket. And while this could have gone very differently, and we still have to talk about the road ahead, even if Nicolas Maduro is arrested, this is not exactly what many people envisioned under that framing he gave on the campaign trail.
Y allá, mira, allá. Ay, chamo. Serán bombas que pasarían. Mamá, que pasaron aviones y yo escuché. Ay, mamá, mira otra. Ay, sí. Ay, shit. Ay, mamá. Apaga la luz, apaga la luz. Apaga la luz. Ay, carajo. Carajo. Shit. Apaga eso y apágalo. tremenda explosión.
Burns is an immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
So yes, call it whatever you want, a smash and grab, a police operation. This is under international law and under just the basic understanding that anyone would have an invasion, right? Grenada lasted like 3 days, okay? For people, I say Grenada, like, I just say a country and people are supposed to know what that means. When the United States invaded Grenada during that crisis, that took 72 hours for the military operation to basically be concluded. That still counted as an invasion, no matter if it was quick or not quick, right? The fact that U.S. personnel was endangered in Grenada is undeniable, and the fact that U.S. personnel invading Venezuela in Chinook helicopters is undeniable, that they're going to be in danger, that there was a possibility of them being shot down. I do have to say that the amount of footage that I have seen of American Chinook helicopters seemingly flying around with zero, like, I'm looking for air defense systems to be firing. I'm looking for shoulder mounted systems because, hey, it's possible that the United States was able to pay some corrupt general for the entire mapped out, like, man-pad system that they could have had around Caracas, and they just hit that in the opening salvo before going in. I'm not going to pretend for anybody, any fanboy of Maduro's purposes, that the Venezuelan military had a particularly a fantastic air defense system. But I also believe that the ability of any individual soldier with basic training to fire down one of these craft with a shoulder mounted munition, as long as they've been run through the ringer on like how to fire it, that there should be enough personnel strewn about that it's a possibility that it could have knocked him out of the sky. Look, I'm not saying that, you know, there's some, maybe there's no I have no clue. All I'm saying is that as of right now, we don't know that we lost any helicopters by getting shot down, and the loss of any American personnel has not been confirmed. And so this seemed to be an operation where I just, again and again and again, every time I look at footage of these helicopters, I might hear small arms fire, but I don't hear anything or see anything of substantive size being fired at these helicopters. It's hard to see and know everything that happened during this time period, definitely this early on. All I'm saying is, when it comes to the anti-air defense systems, I didn't see much of anything. And there has to be questions asked about that, not only of, was the United States able to really just knock out all the air defenses like no problems? Also questions of, was there cooperation from generals in Maduro's army? I mean, I have to ask that question. Was there a possibility that the United States, after putting tens of millions of dollars bounty on Maduro's head, told some general, hey, look, you can get all this money if you just tell me where Maduro is going to be, if you maybe take some of the presidential guard, you know, you move them there, and you allow us to basically grab him. And I understand you can't get the entire military to cooperate in this, but just open up a window for us. Give us the information we need. We'll let the Air Force knock out anything that we need to knock out, even if just to keep up appearances of non-cooperation and the kidnapping of your president. There has to be questions asked about collaboration, because the presidency was angling for collaborators. If you listen to the rhetoric from the White House, it seemed to all be angled towards, if you are a general and you want to make a lot of money and you don't want to be killed by the United States, you don't want to be possibly like on the wrong side of a losing war, then cooperate with the United States, hand over Nicolas Maduro, and not only will you be safe, but you will also get a pretty penny. That was the messaging that I heard from the White House, or at least in the subtext of what the White House was saying, even though it wasn't really much subtext, in what they were sending out to the Venezuelan public and to the government around him. So there has to be questions, considering how little resistance this Chinook's got, of how much of this was overwhelming American air power, and how much of this was cooperation, and how much of this was just the speed and chaos of the operation. Because I imagine maybe with more foreknowledge, more people may have come out and, you know, done something. But if it's happening so quick and you don't really know what's happening, and you don't really know, you know, what the stakes are, like where the battle lines are, a lot of people just freeze up in a crisis. Actually, the majority of people tend to freeze up in a crisis. So what was the result of this? Well, the result of this was simple. Nicolas Maduro was arrested. That's the only concrete result we have. And the reason I'm describing it in this manner before we get into you know, constitutionality or anything else is that I could talk about, well, maybe the people of Venezuela will be free. Maybe, you know, the military will stand out, XYZ, all of these hopeful endeavors. The only thing for sure that has been achieved at this point, if this is the end point of what the government's doing, then the war with this could be over from the government's perspective. Maybe not when it comes to the people of Venezuela. But the only thing that has truly been achieved is Nicolas Maduro no longer sits in a position of power in Venezuela. He is currently being transported to a prison in New York to be detained by federal authorities, to be held against the U.S. system. And you know what? I'm making a solid bet, okay? I know a lot of you guys, hopefully not many of my viewers, but I know some people engage in poly market betting and all that other stuff. I'm going to bet guilty. I'm going to bet guilty. All in on black, all in on guilty. Okay. So that's the only thing for sure we know that has been achieved. So when some people are talking about the future of the freedom of Venezuela, I really hope that that's true. I really hope, and this is me, you know, with my rose glasses on, hoping for the best, that this will lead to an election in 30 days, as is mandated by the Venezuelan constitution, that once the president is, well, gone, dead, otherwise impaired, and I would say this may be categorized as otherwise impaired, they have to hold an election within 30 days with the vice president assuming power. And so if that's true, then an election could be held in 30 days, and instead of an opposition figure taking over, which Donald Trump's already said that one opposition figure, like not a lot of people in Venezuela really like them. So he seems to already be leaning this way, leaning that way, like he's having a say in the direction this is going. And Donald Trump has framed it afterwards. He is saying the U.S. is in control now. You know, if the U.S. has to hold on for a few years, you know, we're not really afraid of boots on the ground, is something that the president of the United States has said openly as the anti-interventionist guy, going from, oh, don't, you know, I am the pro-peace president. I don't want to get your boys stuck in a war overseas in World War III, to U.S. boots on the ground in Venezuela. I'm not necessarily against that. That's great for us. We'll make a lot of money. I'm not trying to exaggerate here. So let me just let you guys listen to it in case you don't agree with my interpretation.
Care of.
Mr. President, does the U.S. running the country mean that U.S. troops will be on the ground? How will that work?
Well, you know, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level, actually. We're not afraid of it. We don't mind saying it. But we're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain. This is a very dangerous attack. This is an attack that could have gone very, very badly. Could have gone very badly. We could have lost a lot of people last night. We could have lost a lot of dignity. We could have lost a lot of equipment. The equipment is less important, but we could have lost a lot. And we're going to make sure that this is proper. We're there now. We're ready to go again if we have to. We're going to run the country right. It's going to be run very judiciously, very fairly. It's going to make a lot of money. We're going to give money to the people. We're going to reimburse people that were taken advantage of. We're going to take care of everybody. It's very important. We couldn't let them get away with it. You know, they stole our oil. We built that whole industry there. And they just took it over like we were nothing. And we had a president that decided not to do anything about it. So we did something about it. We're late, but we did something about it. Yep.
Okay, so very interesting. First things first, he said, we're running, you know, we're going to make sure the country's run this way. The country's going to be run. We're going to run it, XYZ. So it seems to be under the idea that the United States is basically leading this here. We're running the country. So this might not necessarily mean that we're going to directly administer it like Marco Rubio is about to become Douglas MacArthur in Japan, like like a emperor for 5 years, essentially just reform the Constitution, whatever. It could just be the White House says this is what we're going to do, and the hope is that the Venezuelan government, whether it be the vice president that has taken over or whatever elected government could occur in 30 days, there's actually a legitimate election that has yet to be seen, that has yet to be achieved. Then they're just basically going to follow whatever the United States says. The United States says we get however many $1 billion in compensation for the stolen goods, as he says. He's referring to basically nationalized property. Basically, the government of Hugo Chavez, when it took over, nationalized major American energy giants, their property in the country, and then used it for their, their endeavors, their social programs and such. And of course, that upset those companies, upset the U.S. government. And this is something that Trump was able to pull out as one of his justifications to intervene in Venezuela. Obviously, that alone was probably not going to really drum up much support. And so he also did do a lot of balancing on the idea of drug smuggling, even though there really wasn't much there, to be completely honest, as the only physical evidence that's been retrieved from any of these strikes was of marijuana, not of the cocaine that was being talked about, and certainly not of the fentanyl that he rambled about on the campaign trail. An important issue, but not what's being addressed by blowing up these Venezuelan drug boats. But it helped build that public consensus to allow us to get the reins on a country that has the largest reserves in the world. And if you add Guyana, their neighbors, my goodness. And the government of Nicolas Maduro was talking about reclaiming territory in Guyana from their old colonial disputes. And that territory in Guyana just so happened to more recently in historical terms discover quite a lot of fuel, quite a lot of money producing materials under the water. And so those claims started to be revamped by the Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro. But now with Maduro gone, and now with the government that may or may not, depending on how things go from here, cooperate with the United States now that America just kicked in the door to the Capitol, took the president, and skedaddled, then we're talking about a American-friendly government, a government that might be better than Maduro, might not be better than Maduro, might be one that actually has the consent of the governed, might be one that doesn't have the consent of the governed. But I think that the goal is the resources under the ground. And the goal is definitely for somebody like Marco Rubio, this has been a pet project for a while, to get rid of Nicolas Maduro. The question is whether or not this is going to fall in a way that is going to be more beneficial to the Venezuelan people or not going to fall in a way, i.e., number one, are they going to have troops on the ground, or are they going to allow this process of the Venezuelans basically managing their own affairs, managing new elections on their own, choosing their new leadership on their own without the United States having to put troops on the ground? If the United States does put troops on the ground, how long will they have troops on the ground? Like, there's a million different questions that I have. None of this has been put before Congress. And I think that was part of the reason why it's being defined as a police operation. And so they don't have to put it before Congress. Just like how presidents have used the AUMF, the authorization for use of military force after 9/11 to fight terrorists, to do things like, and this was Trump's job as well, killing Soleimani. Now, did the 9/11 attacks have anything to do with this general in the IRGC? Not really. But the IRGC was fighting against American interests in the region, was, working to organize militias in Syria and such to support the government of Assad, was against American interests. And so he used that authority without congressional input to basically go kablamo. And this isn't the same authority. He isn't using the AUMF, the terrorist he isn't using the AUMF that he used to kill Soleimani. I don't know how that might be interpreted later legally, but he is trying to use legalese to essentially say that he can just do this without any congressional input, without even informing the Senate committees that are usually informed. And he went off on his own. So I do just want to say that is not normal. It isn't normal for this to be done without any input, without anyone in Congress being told. It is sometimes, I don't want to say normal as in this is okay, but as in this has been practiced for operations to occur where people on intelligence committees are informed of it beforehand. They are able to have an idea of what's about to happen, so that when it hits the news, they're not left in the dark when speaking to the American public. And so America's representatives aren't going to speak to a scared and confused American public about a war or an assassination or a bombing or a military operation. But there was no information given whatsoever. There was no authority being taken from Congress on this. And so the question has to be put forward. When will Congress put its authority in an operation that could have American troops in Venezuela past this point? If the American president is talking about troops on the ground, troops staying in Venezuela, troops staying for who knows an indefinite amount of time in Venezuela, that he isn't scared of boots on the ground, at some point Congress has to put its authority on the matter. You know, you could talk about like a lazy response, a slow response. You could talk about like the certain legally mandated a period of time before Congress is informed, and Congress has to respond before and after military operation. You know, that I believe that's like 30 days. There's a certain time period that passes. They have to be informed. They have to be given an opportunity to act. But at some point, they have to do something. That's the idea. But this Congress has been so derelict in confronting the administration when they do things that are basically against the power of Congress. For example, combating the power of the purse that Congress holds, going around Congress when it comes to gutting organizations like USAID, finding legal justifications afterwards, that I am not convinced that they're going to do fucking anything. They have the power to do something, and it would be within the interests of senators, the interests of congresspeople. It'd be the interest of anybody that holds any representative seat of power to do something to at least assert their power over the situation. I can understand somebody in a southern Florida district, some Republican who represents that area, not wanting to come out and say, you know, my main position here is I am so upset about international law being violated. If your interest is you wanted Maduro gone, then I can understand you maybe not being particularly upset right now. But the fact that the president of the United States can basically go into a country and snatch up the president and skedaddle using special operators, American soldiers, endangering their lives in the operation without any congressional oversight whatsoever is a limit on Congress's power. It's one thing to do, you know, playing sides, right? I'm going to do what the Republican side wants because it's good for Republicans. I'm going to do what the Democrat side wants. It's good for the Democrats. This is something that limits your power as a representative. You're not going to be president. Okay? If there's any chance that there's anybody in Congress listening to my program, probably not that great chance, a huge chance, but if there is, you're not going to be president. The odds of you being president is tremendously low. The fact that you got to the position of Congress or the position of the Senate is actually very, very, very lucky of you. Getting any further is very unlikely. The idea that you would want to limit your own power now that you for sure have for the hope that one day maybe you'll have the presidency, or to please somebody that you'll never have, again, the job of the president, makes no sense. Congress should be empowered when dealing with an issue that all Americans agree the presidency shouldn't have ultimate authority in, to just go in and just declare war or start invasions without any congressional authority. There isn't a huge call for the American public for the president to have this power. In fact, the majority of Americans are worried about the executive branch.
The issue is that Republicans are still standing for Trump, so Dems can't get votes. And Congress doesn't have any enforcement authority aside from the courts.
The problem is when you say that Congress doesn't have any enforcement authority, there is a majority of congresspeople in Congress right now that stand against the idea that they should have a say when operations like this happen, right? The question is whether there's enough of them who are brave enough to come out and actually either go around Mike Johnson or go over Mike Johnson to challenge the president when it comes to this authority in the future. It doesn't even have to be, hey guys, let's take Maduro and walk him back into the presidential palace in Caracas. I'm sure the majority of Venezuelans are not particularly interested in that outcome. But if you don't create limitations on those powers, now then they're just going to keep doing it. And eventually, it's not going to be an operation that lasts 12 hours and might, depending on next steps that the presidency has not been particularly clear about, end up maybe better for the Venezuelans down the road. That's the hope. I hope everything for them positive in the future. But that's this operation. What if he gets the dumb idea that he could try something like this in Iran? What if he gets the idea that he could try something like this somewhere else? And I don't trust this president's judgment on these matters whatsoever. What if he tried to do something like this in Greenland? Which at one point people could say, oh, come on, he don't really mean that. It's just a negotiating tactic. At this point, considering that they've been pretty open about their interest, he's been pretty clear in his declaration, and now he has sitting American representatives talking about the need to bring Greenland into the Union, trying to have them like a representative for their integration or some shit. You have to take that seriously. I mean, even if it ends up all being cope, it ends up making us all look like fools. We have to take it seriously enough, because I have no interest in seeing U.S. Marines going into Greenland to take over a population that wants no part of being in this country. Not to mention, what will that mean for the transatlantic relationship? Will die under a situation like that. I think the hope is in it feels like the hope in the White House is that Greenland votes for independence from Denmark, so then they can basically squeeze Greenland as them not being part of the European Union, not being part of NATO, but as this independent state, and then they can try to basically strangle it or take it over. It doesn't seem like a joke to me. They might not be able to achieve it. That avenue might not open. The Greenlanders might not even vote for independence. They might say part of Denmark, therefore part of NATO, therefore a huge diplomatic kerfluffle that Marco Rubio will hopefully keep talking him down from. And maybe he can do that for 3 years. But I mean, we can't be certain. Let me read the comments. Somebody donated $10. The issue is that Republicans are still standing for Trump, so Dems can't get votes. And Congress doesn't have any enforcement authority outside from the courts. The thing is, Democrats right now going into the midterms, I mean, they've been performing very well in the special elections. And in the areas where they are having above average turnout, or a turnout that is comparable to a midterm election, Democrats are still performing well. They're performing above average, much better than they're performing in the last election, obviously in 2024. And so I also think the historical trends point towards usually the first midterm after an incumbency wins the presidency is not good for the ruling party. And the majority of Americans are rating him terribly on the economy, the issue that got him elected. So I think Democrats actually going into the midterms have a decent enough chance to take back the House. I think the Senate, not likely at all. But I think the House, I think they have a decent enough chance. So when you say like Democrats can't win the votes, I would say the biggest problem is probably the fact that they are Democrats. That doesn't mean that they can't win. It just means that they need a more inspired message, something to put out to people, something to get people behind them. Affordability might be that. They seem to have hit a few notes that have played well with the crowd as of recent, but they still rank lower than the Republican Party at the moment, with all the problems that the Republicans have had. So, you know, Republicans would be fucked for sure if it wasn't for the problem that the people that have to do the fucking are the Democrats. That's a little vulgar, but that's all I could think of. The affordability note, though, that played pretty well, especially again right now. Democrats actually poll better than the Republicans on the economy, and that's just they played one decent note on the issue of affordability, and the Republicans have just face planted again and again and again on the economy. The situation has actively deteriorated in many areas, and the tariff situation ended up being Americans paying for shit, not foreigners paying for shit, and yeah, it didn't go well for them. So I do think that the midterms are possible to turn out a decent result for the Democrats. This feels a little distant, though, from what we were supposed to be discussing, though, Venezuela. A little distant from that. So maybe we can return to that first. I do not know how the occupation, if there's going to be an occupation, or if we're just going to immediately transfer to an election. We really don't know. All we know for sure is that Maduro is gone. So, what do I think about the possible outcomes from here? Number one, there's a situation, which would be the best, where they have an immediate election in 30 days. And then from there, they're able to find some sort of agreement with the United States that allows the United States to maybe access their market, that allows the United States not to pillage the country, basically strong arming the country into having, oh, we get 50% of your state owned oil company, something that would be allowing Venezuela to get the foreign capital it needs to reinvest its energy industry back to the giant that it was, as it has decayed after years and years and years, and to stabilize the Venezuelan economy, get the Venezuelans the help that they need. That would be the best situation, as well as having actual legitimate elections where the Venezuelans can choose the leadership that they want for their country. That's one good scenario. Another scenario is we just remove Maduro, and then the old thugs around Maduro, the old generals, take his spot. Where in 30 days there is no election, or there is an election and it's a rigged election, and then it's just one of the other thugs around Maduro that takes his spot. But this thug could be more cooperative towards U.S. interests to prevent him getting the same end as Maduro. And so we could just trade one thug for another thug that's more amenable to U.S. interests. It doesn't even need to be somebody that's part of Maduro's old guard. It could be somebody outside of Maduro's old guard, but has many of the same tendencies that terrorize Venezuelans, but has allowed somebody to hold on to power much longer than they should have and much past their legitimacy. So there's a possibility that all we would end up doing is shifting energy interests inside the country, maybe even allowing some American capital flow into the energy industry to allow that to relaunch. But if you keep the same structures of power that allowed the election to be rigged, if you keep the same corruption, if you keep the same authoritarian style of government, then for the people of Venezuela, the economic situation might improve, but the rest of the situation that has put Venezuela where it is, particularly when it comes to issues like just basic stuff like mismanagement of the country, fiscal mismanagement, horrid levels of corruption, people using the reinvestment into the energy sector as their own personal piggy bank, being a constant cloud that could once again corrode the energy sector from inside. This could just lead us back to, even with Venezuela being aligned towards U.S. interests, them just decaying back to where they were. It's a scenario where nothing would really be achieved for the people of Venezuela, but much would be achieved maybe for U.S. interest temporarily, because these things will rot everyone's interest eventually. Then there's a scenario where there's violence in the country, where there isn't really an agreement on who rules what. Maybe there's opposition figures that take part of the country, other figures take other part of the country, gangs rule another part, the former remnants of the armed forces rule another, where the nation splits apart, not necessarily due to independence movements. You know, it's not the best mic in the world. Where the country could split apart, not due to some crazy independence movement, but just just due to the power struggle, falling, fighting over the power vacuum. By the way, I hear so these are all the scenarios that I fear: long-term violence in the country, another authoritarian just taking his place, and hopefully, which is a scenario that I hope happens, quick, legitimate elections, and the country being able to quickly reinvest. Now, mind you, these investments are not going to be something that just happens overnight. And it's not as simple as getting somebody into a position of power and then it's just done. That person could be removed by force. And that's why when Trump talks about boots on the ground, that's actually quite significant. Because let's say there is a legitimate election, somebody does win the actual support of the Venezuelan people, something along those lines, and then afterwards they just get overthrown, or they get, removed in some sort of operation, military coup of some sort. Then what? Do we put our troops in the ground? Do we go and support them? Do we go and defend our business interests and the people of Venezuela's legitimate president? Is that now our responsibility? I guess it would be from the way that the president's talking. So I'm hoping that it's the scenario where there's democratic elections and the people of Venezuela are gone with Maduro. Because here's the problem. If we have a scenario where there is a power struggle or US troops will have to be on the ground, Congress will have to have a say. And what if Congress says we don't want to do this? And so we just push the boulder that eventually Congress says we don't want any part of. And then we pull out of the country, and then Venezuela deteriorates. Gaddafi was a bastard. The country was still split in two, and has still been split in two afterwards. There's a question about follow-up, and that question about follow-up needs to be asked here. But when we're using authority that is not deemed from Congress, that doesn't come from democratically elected representatives, the whole operation could be undermined. Well, the whole operation is based off of basically legal jargon that can only last for max a couple of months before Congress is really supposed to step in, unless it completely abandons its duty. And if it does abandon its duty, then what type of power have we just given the presidency? I mean, this is not a new question. This is a question with the AMF, as we've discussed before. But I mean, it becomes more aggressive in times like this, a lot more aggressive. In fact, it's kicking my head like a mule. Why would Congress have a say? If we're dedicating American forces into a new country and removing the government and putting them in harm's way where we could have coffins come back, we're doing something that could engage in, in warfare, endangering American soldiers, Congress should have a say. If America's sons and daughters are going to have their lives put at risk, Congress should have a say on whether or not this is really in the interest of the American people. It's one thing to say that the president should have flexibility when it comes to like protecting U.S. troops or protecting U.S. personnel or protecting the United States. It's another thing to say that the U.S. president can take a fucking couple dozen Chinook helicopters, fly into any country at any time, and remove their president with nobody else's say besides their own. I think those are two different. I think those are two separate things. Okay. So Maduro's gone. That's good. That part's good. Maduro's a bastard. I view Maduro in the same way that I viewed Bashar al-Assad. Not that them getting, ousted or being removed would necessarily mean that their country is about to be saved or everything is necessarily going to get better, but that nothing could ever get better unless both of them are removed for their respective countries. And so I viewed Nicolas Maduro basically in the same way as Assad, that this was somebody that was not reformable, that the power structure that keeps them alive is by its very nature corrosive. For Bashar al-Assad's, that was Captagon. That was the drug trade. That was horrific levels of corruption and a level of brutality to keep him in power that basically created corpse pits across the nation. For Nicolas Maduro, it's another system of brutality, torture, gangs, and a system that I quite honestly don't know as much about as Assad's, but is still pretty fucking brutal. And so for either of these countries to get past the stage that they were in now, where the corruption that kept Nicolas Maduro in power was the very corruption that was undermining the energy sector that could drag their people out of the poverty that they found themselves in as time went on, now this is an opportunity. And that is good. That is positive. The catch is that opportunity was imposed by the United States. And there's always a problem when things like this necessarily come from outside and not from within. Because if this is something that looks like it's being imposed from the outside, the way we want it done might not be the way that they want it done. And what happens if the Venezuelans elect a president who also wants to nationalize the energy sector? I find that to be unlikely. But let's say it happened. Let's say it was somebody who was like, look, we still want investment. We were going to keep our energy sector nationalized. Would the president of the United States say, okay, we remove Maduro, but this is the legitimate president of Venezuela. We're going to allow them to continue to do that. I don't necessarily think so. And I don't think the Venezuelans believe that either. And so that means the United States is, I don't want to say they're going to dog walk the process as if Caracas was on a leash, but they're going to lead the process. They're going to guide the process, and they're going to make sure that the process leads to their wallets being full, and that the U.S. energy companies that used to have money in Venezuela before Hugo Chavez took it and nationalized it, once again have money in Venezuela. I expect that not to be in lump sum payments or in compensation, like this is some sort of, I don't know, those big cases, people come together and sue companies. Everybody gets a lump sum compensation. If you have mesothelioma, anyway, I expect it to probably be that they want to cut, that they see Venezuela as the future of energy in the world, quite frankly. There's problems with Venezuelan energy, though. Venezuelan crude is incredibly thick. And to describe the difference between light crude and thick crude, it's a little difficult. And so essentially the point is it's more expensive to process it. It's more expensive to process it, and it requires more technical equipment to process it. I mean, you can load it onto barrels and you can ship it out, but if you want to process, you're going to get, the thickness of the crude is going to affect the cost, and processing it allows you to bring more income into the nation. And so if they can process that thick crude, if they can get that equipment into Venezuela, if they can get that processing maybe even done in Venezuela, then that could be very good for the Venezuelans. But here's another thing. What might also be good for American energy companies is if instead that thick crude was transported to the United States, because we have refineries in Texas, in the southern United States, that are designed specifically for that type of crude from Venezuela. So it could be that the United States will try to make a deal where not only do we get a cut of the companies themselves as compensation for previously seized goods, but maybe the first list of destinations, the first place should be the southern United States for Venezuelan crude exports, when before those products were going where? They were going to China. They were not going to America and her allies. And Venezuela, having the largest energy reserves in the world, right next to Guyana's energy reserves, that being open to America and her allies, either to be refined in the United States or otherwise, if processed, if built up, could be useful down the line. But that's going to take investment and capital that might now be available from American companies. But Trump is going to make sure that that growth benefits either the United States or, depending upon you see it, maybe even himself and his family or his family's friends. When you read about how he's trying to reopen business in Russia, who's always front in line? Who's in front in line to reopen the energy cooperation? Oh boy, it's Jared Kushner's college friends. What a coinky dink. All of a sudden, it's all of Jared Kushner's buddies from college that are in the front line to make business in the USSR. My goodness. So I don't really know. I don't really know where the profits are going to be angled, because we don't know what the deal looks like yet. I don't know if they've already inked a deal on what's going to happen to Venezuela's crude. I don't know if they've already inked a deal on who's going to have what when it comes to investment opportunities in the country. Because as far as we know right now, they don't even know who the next leadership's going to be. Because it can't just be, this would be pretty fucked if it was just, okay, guys, here's my notepad, here's my pencil, here's my list of demands. Whoever is the next president, here you go. That might be how it ends up going. That's probably honest now that I think about it. I said, but it'd be fucked up if they did it, and now I've realized it's probably exactly how it's going to be done, actually. Never mind. But yeah, it's probably going to be something like that. And whatever government's going to be that's going to come into power is not going to have a lot of leverage. There's already a problem of the fact that whoever comes in power is going to be worried about the entire system falling from out under them, because there's going to be other power brokers. There's going to be other people who think that they should be the one in power, et cetera, all those types of things. But at the same time, they have to fight against a government that just proved that they can snatch the president out of the Capitol. What leverage do you have there? You could try to base some leverage in international norms and standards. The president would never do X, Y, and Z. That would be against the legitimate interests of the people of Venezuela. Yeah, no, this is not a dealing with a we're not dealing with a collection of principled rules-based individuals here in the Trump administration. Okay, I'm not gonna tell you that Steve Witkoff is of a humanitarian sort. Pretty easy for China to spin USA imperialism. Spin? How is this good though? Well, I mean, we don't really know how it's going to end up really until it's all said and done. But I mean, creating any opportunity for people of Venezuela to move on from Maduro, move on to a presidency that's legitimately elected by the people, an election that isn't rigged, an ability to rebuild their energy sector free of US sanctions and free of inept management. Like, those are all good things, but those are only good things if they come to fruition. And to come to fruition, that requires foresight, planning, and like investment economically, and investment in security and stability on the ground. And I don't know how the Trump administration is going to manage any of this, because there's been no public conversation about this. The public conversation that the nation's had about Venezuela is moving drugs that kill your kids. We need to blow it up. That's it. That's the entire conversation we've had as a country. We haven't had a conversation besides the idea that these drugs are coming into the United States. They're threatening the American public. We need to blow up these drugs, this massive drug smuggling operation. We need to stop it. And that was essentially it, between like little mentions of the illegitimacy of the Venezuelan presidency and that they hope that they have better management. So there hasn't really been a conversation of next steps past this point. And from the way that Trump is talking, he seems to be talking about this very openly, as if he's allowing the situation to flow from here. No, there isn't. He's not. It doesn't seem like he's like recognizes like, okay, we're gonna have an election in these many days, I'm sure, because the Venezuelan constitution says X, Y, and Z. So I'm sure, and so we're just gonna have to wait and see when it comes to the Trump administration plans. I mean, they said they're gonna control the process. So I assume that means elections overseen by the United States, which the United States hopes will elect a U.S.-friendly presidency, which will then be amenable to their interests, if not intimidatable.